Hello. I thought today we'd visit about different kinds of horses, not breeds necessarily, but different psychological things of horses. There are horses just like there are people with all kinds of different attitudes and perspectives on things. Horses have that same thing. We need to learn to recognize that because it's a horse's mind that we train. It's not their body. You may have watched the thing on the Horn Brothers, how they would train a horse, and you're training the mind. I've seen horses go out and turn loose in an arena, do all the top dressage movements on their own, just playing. I learned one time I had a horse trainer that I consider the greatest horse trainer in the world. His last name was Hamilton. He was a circus horse trainer, and he worked horses at Liberty. He told me one time, he said, Lee, never, never punish a horse. How do you get by with that? I said, how do you do that? He said, ignore the bad as much as you can and reward the good things. He said, that's how I train all of my horses at Liberty. He had 3-year-olds at Liberty doing the upper level dressage movements of piaffe and passage, totally at Liberty in the middle of the ring. And it was because of that philosophy. And I learned some more things from him there, but that's the main thing, is you train by a system of reward and punishment. You try to set up the circumstance so that the horse provides his own punishment. For instance, if you have a rein on a bit, if your hands are still and a horse runs into it, that's his own punishment for running into the bit. Your hands need to be soft and forgiving unless you want the horse to do something. It's just like you. If you went out and you run into a brick wall, after you do that a time or two, you're going to say, that's not very smart. And you'll back off. You won't run into the wall. Horse will do the same thing. A horse, as we've discussed in another video, he can feel a fly land on his shoulder and flick his muscles, flick the skin over that shoulder to make the fly off. It doesn't take strength or spurs or whips or any of that to cause a horse to feel, to be able to train them. Sometimes they're helpful to us poor humans that have to have artificial aids. But your aids we've talked about some of the aids being your hands, your weight, your legs, your voice, your body position, are all things that you have control of. I try to teach my students to first of all learn to do nothing. And until you're good enough to do nothing on a horse, you're not good enough to do something. Not really. And yet all people get on a horse and the first thing they do is yank on them and kick them to make them go, yank on them to turn them or something. And if you will think about the horse's mind and how it's done, if you think about a child that's about 5 years old but can't speak words to you, a horse and a 5-year-old that's in that circumstance train almost identically. So we utilize that to our benefit. You need to sit and think. Sometimes when you're riding and you're trying to train a horse, park in the middle of the arena and fold your arms and bow your head and say, all right, I want the horse to learn to do this. What circumstances can I put him in that will cause that to happen? Much of what we do with jumping horses and dressage horses is develop their muscles. That's body training, okay? We still do it through the mind, but there are certain movements that we do to exercise certain muscles. The best way to learn to ride a horse straight is to ride in circles. And I know that sounds crazy, but when you're riding, for instance, to the left in a circle, you want the horse's body to fit on the circle you're riding so that the circle comes in through his nose, over the top of his head, down his back, and out through his tail. That's the ideal of development. And you can make those circles smaller and smaller. Once you get to about a 5 meter circle though. It's very difficult for a horse to bend more than that circle. And so you don't hold them there long and you don't put them there. That's how you develop the muscle system to be able to do the great dressage movements that you want them to do. Now, if you're training jumping horses, there's all kinds of jumps that you can use to teach a horse to use those proper muscles. We use a system of cavaletti where you have little bitty jumps that a horse either trots through, canters through, and you set them at a distance according to how long the horse's stride is initially, so that he's very comfortable in going through them. And he begins to use those muscles because when a horse jumps, you want his head and neck to go forward and down, the body to round, the knees come up nice and tight uh, in what you call the farm over the jump. And there are exercises that can help that. The good horses do it mostly natural. I'll attach to the back of this some pictures of some horses jumping that I've worked with. It's easy to train once you get the connection made between your mind and a horse's mind. Now, I may have told you this story too. I have a friend who's a veterinarian down in Texas. He calls himself an amateur horse trainer. One day he's going out to train his horse, and every day he had been out for the last couple of months with this horse. It was a fight from beginning to end. He thought to himself, I'm a veterinarian. I'm going to give her a relaxer. So he goes into his lab and he makes up her relaxer and he has it laying on his counter there. And he thinks, if I'm going to give her a relaxer, I'll go take one too. So he goes and he gets a relaxer for him. He goes out and he told me, he said it was the best day of training he had ever had. In all the time that he had been training, it was the best day. And she had just done, this little mare just done everything he wanted to do and done it right and had made great progress, he thought. He got off and put her away and he come walking into his clinic and there lay the horse's tranquilizer on the counter. He had taken one, but he had forgotten to give the horse one. Horses are very sensitive to your mood and to your attitude. If you're going to jump big fences or going to ride a dressage course, you need to think through everything you're going to do. And you think through it with the horse so that the horse, yes, can understand your thoughts a little bit and will learn from what you're wanting to happen. They will learn to do it. I've had a number of jumping horses that people have brought to me. I used to take horses. In fact, we had one called the Rogue because he was such a bad horse. The Assassin we've talked about, and that he was a problem. Uh, Almost every really good jumping horse I've ever owned, if I got them after someone else had schooled them over jumps, had some problems that we had to solve and get them over because the horses develop bad habits just like people. And they have all kinds of bad habits that they will take. One of the things they don't want is they don't want to get hurt. So if you're jumping a horse, you need to learn that when the horse leaves the ground, you're not in contact, you're not pulling on the horse's mouth. You're not banging the horse's mouth as he lands. You want to be, you can ride well enough to have the same contact. If you have the weight of the rein in your hand, that's the contact that you need to learn to get to. Some horses like a little more contact, some a little less. And so you feel the horse in the training to get to where he will feel that. You want to have a horse what they call on the bit. Means he has a hold of the bit with his mouth and the bit is in your hand, but it doesn't pull on him unless you want it to. That's learning to get to do nothing on top of a horse. One of the ways I used to teach riders to do nothing is I'd set up an alleyway, if you will, of jumps. Wing them in with poles on the standards off, sloping off, and then the jumps down through the middle, and have the students jump them with their hands behind their back, with their hands folded in front of them, with their hands on top of their heads, so that the hands became independent of their body movement. Most people support the body movement with the hand, and you need to get over that. If you have the leg down and the weight in the heels, the leg becomes the base, and then you simply ride in jumping in a 2-point position where you're touching the saddle with your knees, with your leg, and your seat just barely brushes the saddle. Very light in the saddle. So those are just some of the little things that make a difference in how we ride and how we get a horse trained. Hope you've had a wonderful day today, and I'll talk to you later.